of what each other was doing, some of the good things that were happening, and then we spotlighted issues that were hindering um, creating that culture of professionalism. Because as you know, if you spotlight what right looks like, you backlight our negative behaviors. You show what isn't going right in in your organizations and in the profession. So we saw clearly some of the areas that needed improvement and focus, and so we highlighted those to the secretary, and we went about our work. As that initial period ended of trying to answer the secretary's question of whether there was a crisis in senior leader misconduct and in our profession as a whole, once we got that answered and we moved forward, we started taking on and broadening our aperture new thoughts. We started getting into neuroscience and behavior and decision making. Started studying some of the work of economists like Daniel Kahneman and Dan Ariely and many of the authors that many of you have read about, leader Simon Sinek. These people, in many respects, knew more about how we make decisions as human beings than we do as a member of a profession of arms that has the ability to take human life and make decisions that impact the taking of human life. And so we started focusing on those characteristics of leader development, character development, values-based ethical decision-making, and how all of that works, and how do you develop people focusing on people, not the organization, to prepare people to make those decisions, whether they're simple decisions of right and wrong while under stress, pressure, sleep deprivation, or whether it's walking people to a very very methodical decision-making process, but in a very toxic environment where the environmentals are causing them to make bad decisions. So we walk that path. And Chief Tuman's going to talk about character and why it matters here after I finish talking. And so that's one of the many components. But I think the journey took us really to the impact that culture has on our profession of arms. And many of you know what I'm talking about, and that is your culture, your climate of your organization or your unit. Really has an impact on the behavior of the people in it. And if your leadership cares, if you know you trust your leadership or your supervisors, your managers, you know that you're more willing to bring forth a problem, whether it's a behavioral problem. And again, that spotlighting, backlighting is going to occur. You're going to notice when someone is not acting right. You're going to feel it's appropriate to intervene and to ask a question. Hey, are you okay? When you see someone acting differently. And you're willing to say something when you see people going down that path that they shouldn't go down, because that's what people do in a good and positive environment, taking care of each other. So when I talk about a culture of professionalism, that's kind of the background to what I really want to talk about. So I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to read to you because we put this down, and this was a paper that we wrote to the secretary, and it really describes, if you go to this, if you look at these key points that I want to talk about today before we open it up for questions, this paper will answer them. We'll address them, I should say, and then we'll talk more about our responsibilities as individuals, leaders, supervisors, and managers. So the profession of arms, how do we define it? The profession of arms is comprised of the uniformed services and defense services and agencies that defend the nations. the nation, and that includes our civilian component. This responsibility places the profession of arms among a handful of societal trustee professions, whose primary distinguishing characteristic is to provide a uniquely necessary service to society through the ethical application of expert knowledge and practice. So the others are firefighters, medical, police, legal. Those are the other societal professions that we talk about. As a result of the trust they engender, social trustee professions are granted significant autonomy and self-regulatory responsibilities by those they serve. Such trust must not be taken for granted. When a profession fails to adhere to the society's established values or trust is eroded, the society may exercise its right to restrict or remove the granted autonomy. And we see this particularly in the sexual assault, sexual harassment lane, where Congress, and I'm not reading now, but where Congress is more than willing to step in and intercede when they see us straying. The profession exercises discretionary judgments and decisions and actions to fulfill their legal and moral obligations to support the Constitution and defend the nation. Most of these judgments directly impact the life or well-being of others, either Americans or foreign citizens. As such, professionals require a high degree of moral courage to consistently place the needs of those they serve over personal considerations. The term profession represents the context in the community to which individuals belong, while the term professional represents the embodiment of the individual's commitment and responsibilities to the profession and to others in the profession. With an understanding of the relationship between professional actions and society's trust and the voluntary nature of service, the profession and the professional must seek a cycle of constant development that reduces individual and institutional vulnerability. So you see a relationship between the profession and the professional. There is a relationship, and there are obligations that the profession has to the professional and that the professional has to the profession. The profession must adapt the education, training, and experiential opportunities required to hone professional skills and clarity in policies and programs as values and standards evolve. The profession must seek to reduce ambiguity and vulnerability by reducing situational and cultural factors that may place individuals in positions to engage in activities that are morally questionable. And when appropriate, the profession must determine the recoverability of a professional in the event of an incident and ensure accountability. In return, the professional owes loyalty to the Constitution. Professionals must, along with the developmental opportunities provided by the profession, avail themselves of opportunities for self-development to reduce susceptibility to professional, including ethical failures. And professional leaders at all levels owe consistent and impartial unit leadership that pursues good order and discipline through a climate of dignity, respect, and trust. The stewards of the profession, the senior general and flag officers, senior executives, and senior enlisted personnel, and set the conditions for the profession. Its custodians, the officers, enlisted, and civilian unit and organizational leaders, set the standards of acceptable behavior and groom future professionals. These combined leaders' efforts contribute to the culture of the profession and sustain the necessary cycle of development. The professional status of the armed forces comes with great expectations by society and from within the profession. How professionals conduct themselves using the means of the profession matters just as much as the outcomes achieved. So that goes into the definition, the components of professionalism, how culture and climate, or how the professionals and the stewards of the profession and the custodians of the profession create the environment. And it really sets the tone for the values-based ethical decision-making and leader development that must occur to strengthen the profession and continually evoke that expert learning and expert knowledge that only we can internally create to make ourselves better. So I want to wrap up here um, before we get to the questions by saying that this culture in climate, and many of you have been part of organizations. There was an article that came out a couple weeks ago I saw on LinkedIn. It described thick, quote, thick organizations, ones where you felt the most a part of. And I can't remember the author's name, but it was where you brought on that air of being a part of a family. And it was because of the leadership, it was because of the people around you. You had this environment where you felt trust and you felt a familial relationship with everybody around you. Those organizations, I would say, have a positive culture and a positive climate. In the three questions I pose, and we'll get through them, but what are some of the indicators of professional culture? What can we as individuals do to strengthen our profession? And the last, and we'll go through them, is how does a professional culture influence the prevention of negative behaviors? So as I kind of spoke to earlier, is that when we can identify, when we can spotlight what right looks like, and we can have an environment, a professional culture in our organization, I would suppose that we can backlight those negative behaviors so that they contrast with what right looks like. And then we can address as peers, as leaders, as subordinates, we can address those issues headstrong and eliminate them, or deal with them as necessary. So with that, I would like to close my comments and open the floor to questions. And if there are none, we'll go ahead and move on to what are some of the indicators of professional culture. And I'm seeing some pop up now. And respect, and treating with dignity and respect. And empowerment. Trust is the bedrock of the profession. That's the quote that you'll hear many people say, because if you can't trust your leadership, if you can't trust your peers, if you can't trust the people around you, then you're going to close off and you're not going to want to share. So rapport, courtesy. Yeah, fear of reprisal is a good one, and I would say that that's that's an offshoot of trust, but it is a specific offshoot that has to be addressed. And ethics, and I would go into saying specifically values-based ethics, as opposed to what we usually think to is the legal portion of ethics, where this is a compliance for ethics. That's the floor. The ceiling is we want values-based. Accountability, absolutely. Transparency and accountability help to embolden that trust. And so morals, set standards, values. The Army has an Army ethic or an ethos. And I know all the services have their own set of values, and they all hinge off of the department's ethics regulation, joint ethics regulation. They're all different, but they're all the same. And in that they all look toward that values-based ethical decision-making and leadership. Self-awareness. So you'll see a component of, and we'll talk a little bit about humility in the next question, but self-awareness is a huge component of humility, and when you ask what we can do as individuals to strengthen the profession, that's one of those things, is we can be more humble. Humble doesn't mean subservient, doesn't mean, I mean, you can be humble and still be confident and charismatic. And that's something that we strive for as individuals. So other indicators, I haven't seen it, but it doesn't mean it wasn't up there. But communications, open communications is another indicator of a professional culture. Not being afraid to have that have that discussion, that hard discussion. The desire to assist in the next generation, yeah, the development of the future. So, so I think I would also argue that healthy competition is a component of a professional culture, a striving to do your best, which is kind of competition. So I'm seeing some lost audio. Okay. So I see. I'm looking self-awareness again, and I'm continuous growth and learning. So yes, that idea again. Going to the next question, what can we do as individuals to strengthen our profession? So that lifelong learning, that desire to make yourself better, prepare yourself every day. Professional athletes look in the mirror. They do the mirror drills a lot of times. You've seen they will talk to themselves. They will hype themselves up. They will prepare themselves for the beginning of for the tournament or for the game. I would also say I've seen and I've practiced myself the mirror test. Before I go to sleep, I would look in the mirror and say, did I do everything today that I could for the people under my stead? And if I could look myself back in the mirror and go to sleep with a clear conscience, I thought I assumed that I had done the best I could. So that self-accountability, that challenging yourself to do better. There were days I didn't sleep well because there were days that I tried, but I still felt like I didn't do everything I could. I think those kind of things, along with the education, the formal education and the formal development, I think they take you to a different level as a leader. And if everybody did it, if you could encourage your peers to do it and your subordinates to do it, imagine the culture that you'd create or the impact it would have on your culture, your climate, your command climate. So that practicing of humility, that's that component of being self-aware, appreciating everyone's talent on your team. Everybody brings different set of skills to the game. I wrote an article with Lieutenant General, now General Bob Brown, on humility and mission command. And one of the examples we used a couple, was Shane Battier, professional basketball player, Duke University. He was the no stat hero. I mean, he didn't have any single stat that he excelled in, but whenever he was on the court, the team played better. And the coaches knew that. It was just the way he played on the court that made everybody else play better. And the passing skills and the defensive skills. So, if you don't recognize those people on your team, then you're missing out on what they can bring. Empathy is a huge component of humility. Listening, and not just giving someone time, but actually listening. Active listening is a skill set of it takes it to a different level of understanding. It shows your interest in the subject that the person is presenting to you. And if we could all just take a moment, if you were interested in it, just Google active listening, you'll see it's a little bit different than just sitting there with somebody and giving them an opportunity to talk to you. Delegating authority, another component of humility. All of these things we can do as individuals to help strengthen the unit that we're in or the organization we're in. Allow individual growth and development. It's hard to let the people go to SARC school, to all of the schools they have to attend, to things like this, to take them out of the busy day. All of you. I'm not a member of the SAPR team here, but they're all. I mean, we're up to 195 participants, which is a huge record, and that's a huge community of practice. 196 now. That you've taken your time out, and your bosses have allowed you the time, if you even asked. That's a huge commitment. So then, and I will just say for those commanders that are out there, I mentioned this earlier. I was talking with Susan. Commanders walk that line. You have a hard place. You're in a hard place because you have to protect the Army through following regulation, but you also have to protect the people, whether they're victims or whether they could potentially be retaliated against. You have the hard line to walk through, and I challenge you to figure your place in that middle. So, last question: how does the professional culture influence the prevention of negative behaviors? Peter Drucker, an author, he had a saying. He said, "Culture eats strategy for lunch." So, no matter what the strategy is for reducing any negative behavior, if we don't change the culture as a part of that strategy, then it's just gonna I won't use a term that my grandfather used, but something in the wind. But you would be applying resources towards something that it is not going to bear fruit. We have got to change our culture, and I would say that having a more professional atmosphere, focusing on what makes us expert, building trust, looking at ourselves. I think is a good start to changing the culture. I would say, and I wrote this down because I wanted to get it across right. The culture is beginning to change when you start seeing behaviors. So that's selections, promotions, policies, resource decisions. When you start seeing those behaviors that are consistent with what you say you value, or we say we value, I think you're starting to see culture change. So if you read the article by Lenny Wong on lying to ourselves, where we've created a bureaucracy that hinders our ability to have candor, and that's a great example of if we wanted to create a culture that didn't appreciate integrity violations, we would make sure that our policies didn't force them. So again, that's an example. So with that, I think if we need to look at the culture as a profession, and I think we can, if we can do whatever we can to strengthen that profession as individuals, as units, as organizations, as leaders. I think we can get to a better place and have an environment that will be conducive for moving forward and reducing the negative behaviors. So with that, let me look and see what questions are out there. Let's see if I can address some.
So Colonel Taradash, while we're scrolling through to see if there was any questions that we may have missed, there was a lot of good comments there. I can see these stakeholders are very invested in learning about the profession and being professional. And I saw some examples there where there was a couple of comments saying, you know, you really need to walk the walk. I just wanted to ask you, as you were coming up in the ranks as an officer, at what point did the light come on? And was there somebody who influenced you possibly that made you shift your behavior or shift your mindset?
So I think there's an old saying: you don't join the army joins you. I think that point hit me as a captain after I commanded a company. I think up to that point I was just in it because I enjoyed what I was doing. But once I had, and as a platoon leader, you're in command of troops, but it's not the same. I think that's the point as commanding and being responsible and accountable for the people under my stead. I think that's kind of where it really happened. And I started to really understand. But you know, you learn new things every day, and so I feel like today, at almost 34 and a half years of service, I feel like I'm still learning, and I wish I would have known what I do today, and I wish I would have been able to apply what I know today way back then when I was actually impacting small groups of people. Um, so it um, so I would say it was about the captain, mid cap, junior captain level that I really got it. So, and I'm seeing some really great comments coming up, about choice of accepting or people accepting, declining, or modifying questionable behavior. Um, wouldn't it be great to know if someone's coming to you that's damaged, that has issues? Right now, we have a litigious culture. We don't want to violate people's rights. But if we truly are a profession that allows our members to employ lethal force, that's a huge responsibility. And for somebody to come to you that has issues, whether they're behavioral issues or whether they're misconduct or whether they're personal, you should know. Because if you want to trust them to employ lethal force in the name of the United States, you you better know what baggage they're carrying before they're carrying that weapon. Um, we get pushback on civilians as a member of the profession of arms. We get pushback a lot. And I would say, having served 3 tours in the Pentagon, and I say that proudly. It's a lot of people balk at that. I watch senior civilian leaders advising members of the military uh, who make those decisions on lethal force, and those civilians are giving advice, and they're developing resources, or they're making policies that we, the trigger pullers, are going to use. I would say that's a key component. They're key members of the profession if they're doing that, and that's the retort that I would give. So.
Thank you so much. And I just have one more question for you. So, what advice do you have for the leaders who might be working with our brand new, the newest junior service members, junior officer level? What advice would you have for them in terms of moving forward?
So that's a broad question. I would encourage them to see their role. Uh, let me. So Simon Sinek, the author of Start with Why and Leaders Eat Last, he worked with us very closely as we stood up the office and trying to find the right people to connect with out in the community, in the civilian business. He used to say, he used to ask people, "What do you define leadership for me? Define leadership." And all the military folks would come back with, "Well, leaders' mission is to accomplish a mission and keep the welfare of their people," and they would go to that normal mission first, people always. Okay. Well, Simon would retort back and say, "No, leaders, you're a leader of people, not a leader of missions." And so I would say to that new person, that new leader coming in, focus on your people. particularly at the initial entry level of leadership. As a young lieutenant, you're only responsible for 20, 21, 20, 30 people at the most, usually. That is wonderful. You can get to know all 30 of those people, and you should. Start with people first. The mission will get accomplished if you put your emphasis on your people. The mission will be accomplished. The second is value how you get things accomplished as much as getting them accomplished. Right now, I would say most people value getting things accomplished and not how we get them accomplished. Learn, self-learning, self-awareness. Try to, I would say that people are not either humble or not. You can learn humility, and you have to practice humility. There are things that will cause you to not be humble. I mean, it's happened to me many times. You get caught in whether you're tired, you're stressed, you're just not thinking. So constantly work on your humility. And I could go on and on, but I think with that, I think that's a good start. And try to find those ways that you can develop trust within your organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Colonel Taradash, for answering our questions here. And I know we were asking you personal questions from your perspective, but everyone appreciates the response and the advice that you give them. With our SAPR stakeholders, a victim advocate or a SARC doesn't get the opportunity to have a growth pattern in a long period of time before they have to take care of people. They have to do it from day one. And so I think a lot of them appreciate having some insight from you all and to figure out what are some fast track ways that I can hone in on some skills so I can get to know my people, so I can better understand when they come forward and they come to them for assistance. So thank you so much. And if you guys have any other questions for Colonel Taradash, you're welcome to send them over to Emily or myself. And if you want anything specific, or if you need the references that he talked about earlier, that he mentioned are some good speaking and talking points that have been presented in the various professional development arenas. So at this time, I'm going to move on to our next speaker that we have here today, and that is Chief Master Sergeant Bryan Tuman. He is the Senior Enlisted Advisor for the Department of Defense here at Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office. He's the Principal Enlisted Advisor to the Director on all matters relating to the strategic planning, research, and development of prevention approaches and implementation of the SAPR strategic plan across the department. He grew up in southern Minnesota, came into the Air Force in 1993. After graduation and basic training, he attended the Air Force's Medical Service School at Shepherd Air Force Base. He has served in numerous technical and leadership positions across the Air Force Medical Service, and Chief Tuman's contributions across the Air Force include assignments as a PME instructor, a first sergeant, and he's deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So we're very fortunate to have him here with us at SAPRO, and you all get the opportunity to learn a little bit more about him and what he's going to talk about today in terms of why character matters. Chief?
Test. All right, we're go. Awesome. Thanks, Ms. Montoya. Colonel Taradash, thank you for those key points on professionalism. I don't think we can talk about professionalism enough, and how it translates into the command culture, the command climate in our units. I was very excited when I had an opportunity, when I was asked to kind of speak at a webinar. This is my first time on a webinar, which is a little different than a kind of a public setting. So I'm trying to read the comments as they come across, and so I apologize if I miss a couple, but there are some great feedback, great comments from the field. So at any point during my presentation, if you have a question, I will try to monitor the chat zone as I go through. I've got a lot of people here helping me. When we talk about character, and the values piece, the very first thing I do is when I get a topic is I like to just Google it. I like to see what comes up, and it just kind of starts to kind of trigger some thoughts in my over the course of my career. And so I wrote down the first 4 quotes that came up when I talked about, or when I typed in character into Google as it pertains to leadership. And so the first one was, character is much easier kept than recovered. And that was by Thomas Paine. And so, I think, when we talk about character, the minute that you lose character, it comes in doubt. And like Colonel Taradash was talking about, the trust. Trust is so important from a leader to a to a subordinate, but both from a subordinate back to the leader. There has to be mutual trust there. And so I think Thomas Paine was onto something when he made that comment. The second one was, character is defined by what we do when we think no one is looking, and this translates. If you're in the Air Force, this is this is integrity first. Making sure you're doing what's right when nobody's looking. The next one, conduct is the best proof of character. The way you conduct yourself in public, in private, says a lot about your character. And then the last one, solid character will reflect itself in consistent behavior, while poor character will seek to hide behind deceptive words and actions. And that was Miles Monroe. Again, I think it's, when you're talking about character, we know what good character looks like. We see it in our duty sections, but sometimes bad character is kind of masked. We think the individual is doing right, and is a good, upright, has good values, good virtue, but it's just being masked. And so as I get through my presentation here, you'll kind of see some of those traits and concepts that we talk about. I'd like to just kind of reiterate Colonel Taradash, what he was talking about when it comes to the Professionalism Forum that was kind of sponsored. I think it was back in February timeframe. I was asked by Sergeant Major Choxel, who is the SEAC, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman, to kind of be a part of this. And I will tell you, it was very eye-opening for me to be a part of this forum where we had senior enlisted leaders from across major commands. We had COCOM, SELs there. But I think what I appreciated the most was we had junior enlisted as part of the forum. And again, listening to them and how they view professionalism from where they stand. I mean, it's really no different than when when I was an E4, E5. I looked to my leadership, and sometimes that character, that trust that they really cared about me always wasn't there. And so it was interesting to hear firsthand how they really didn't think that this many senior enlisted leaders cared about the professional development. Was great to hear, and it was very eye-opening. So we'll just quickly go over the kind of the points that we're going to talk about. We'll just quickly define character. We're going to talk about its components, but I really want to get into how do we develop character, and then what are the responsibilities, both from a leadership standpoint and a personal standpoint. And when we talk about a personal standpoint, I want to kind of give you a little story that kind of maybe brings it together. And then ultimately, why does character really matter? We talk about it, we think we see it, but as we continue to build the next generation of leaders, character needs to be at the forefront of how they conduct themselves. So when we talk about defining character, and you go into Google and you look Google, and I Google everything. Again, it's very thought stimulating and provoking. A lot of times I disagree with what Google says, but who am I? The first definition that comes up is the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. It sounds like this real world academia definition, but here's where I like to break it down. I like to break it down. This is an individual's moral and ethical quality based upon their traits, values, and virtues. And so I pulled a little bit from different definitions, but this is kind of something that I kind of created. But what we do is we wanted to help determine what is right. That's what character is about. And then let's give that, it gives a leader motivation to do what is appropriate regardless of the circumstances and consequences. And I'm going to take you to a book, and I know I throw a lot of books out there and people write down titles, but if you have not read the book Black Hearts, I encourage you, please add that to your library as almost required reading. It really talks about just kind of the circumstances and consequences arise and how the lack of leadership or the downward spiral of a unit takes place. And that character is very challenging because it is based upon what is going on around us. Sometimes we make decisions based upon our peer group. Do we want to be liked? Do we go to a certain party? Do we drink because our peer groups are drinking? And you'll hear throughout kind of our office here in the DoD Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, this issue of alcohol and how do we treat alcohol when it comes to sexual assault? What do we do? How can we make better choices? How do we get our junior NCOs, our junior officers, to make good decisions? We talk about, we go to basic training. I'll speak from an enlisted point of view. We go to basic training for 8 to 12 weeks, depending upon your service. And then at the end of the 8 to 12 weeks, we have, again, depending upon your service, we may have 1 week ethics course where we kind of learn ethical behaviors and how do we take what we learned in this basic training to become, better airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines. It is extremely difficult, and I would caution us to say that after 8 to 12 weeks of basic training that we have this individual with high moral character, high ethic background because of this 8 to 12 weeks. Character needs to continue to be developed in the unit when they graduate. It has to happen from peer to peer, and from leadership down to the subordinate. But it can also take place from the subordinate up. There are a lot of times subordinates making good decisions in the unit are noticed. And I wrote this down, and so I'm going to give a little shout out to Master Sergeant Allison Army, and put in there, in a professional environment, unprofessional and negative behaviors stand out. And I will tell you that is even true for your junior NCOs, your junior enlisted, your junior officers. When they conduct themselves in a professional manner, sometimes leadership sees that and says, you know what, I need to make sure I make the right comments. And so it's not just a top down. Sometimes it's a bottom up behavior. So we need to keep that in mind as we talk about character. So again, you talk about, well, what traits make up character, and these are 3 aspects of character that I came up with. There are, number of books out there that'll say top 14 habits or traits of character. So when we talk about traits and values and virtues, if I had to do this over again, I would probably put values first and then virtues and then traits, because I think they build on each other that way. We all have a certain level of values that we grow up with. They were growing. We lived in an environment where our coaches got on us. I tell my sons all the time that they need to go out for a sport because they need to get yelled at by their coach. I think there's a certain learning process. There's a certain level of maturation process that goes through when you get yelled at. I think there's a certain level of process that you go through when you get dumped by your girlfriend. All of these things, as much as they suck at the time, and goes back to those, the environment that we're in, that is building your character, and how you respond to things that happen in your life from a negative standpoint and a positive standpoint helps to develop your character. But your values and what you learn growing up, what you think of. I often talk about if you live in a family or live in a community where they condone sexual harassment. Maybe that's Maybe it's something that is, again, condoned in the house. What is that? There's a value that you're bringing into the military. And so we need to make sure that we shift those values. Virtues, the good behavior. It's the, we talk about, I think the Army, when we talk about virtues, talks about courage, justice, the benevolence of something. It goes back to that good behavior. Again, trying to develop individuals' character, and we'll get into that in the next slide. And then traits. The traits is who you are in your day-to-day life. Now, the thing about traits that's interesting is we sit here and we for the most part, nobody wakes up and goes, you know what, today I'm going to screw up. Today I'm going to make a bad decision. But we all know that we've made bad decisions. And so making sure that our habits consistently are of positive in nature lend itself to character development and being of good character. Next slide. I'm trying to read some of the comments and continue to talk. So again, developing character, it has to be cultivated every day in the environment where you are. Now, this is difficult sometimes based upon some of the conditions that we're in. If you're in a deployed setting, if you're taking incoming every day, if you're out at sea, you have to find a way. I know the Navy has, I believe it's called the CSED and the Council of Sailors Against Destructive Decisions, Coalition of Sailors Against Destructive Decisions, right? Destructive behaviors. So, I heard about this when I had my sit down with the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, and it really kind of opened my eyes, and I was like, wow, what a great tool if we could get this level across each of the services. And I know each of the services kind of has their own, whether it's Airmen Committed to Excellence, ACE and Airmen's Forum, the Not in My Squad group in the Army, that peer development is key. So it doesn't matter from the field to the flight line to the deck plate. We need to develop character. And so some of the ways that we do that is providing opportunities for our junior members, enlisted or officer, whether they're professional development classes held by leadership, the informal mentorship. I think sometimes we talk about mentorship and it's the no kidding in your face, hey, here's a good way to do this. But I think informal, just watching somebody and observing how folks do business is great. Again, peer-to-peer interaction in developing the character, the CSED, the Airmen's Council, but ultimately we must get to a culture where our character is evident in our trust and commitment towards each other. It all comes back to trust. It is so vital to the mission, to what each and every one of us do. And it does not matter if you're on a flight line or you're on a deck plate. That level of trust up and down the chain and lateral from peer to peer is extremely important. So this is where I take the opportunity to talk about personal commitment and kind of tell a story. And so it's a little cheesy, but if you bear with me, we'll get through it together. But it's about a chicken and a pig. And I know some of you have kind of heard this, but so a chicken and pig are they're on a farm and they're running around, and the farmer's wife is cooking breakfast, and so the chicken and the pig smell the breakfast, and they go up to the window and they peer in, and sure enough, the farmer's wife has made bacon and eggs for Mr. Farmer, and the chicken leans into the pig and says, hey, look at that. We had something to do with that breakfast. And the pig says, I understand that we had something to do with that, but please remember, you and your family participated in that breakfast. Me and my family were committed to that breakfast. And so we talk about commitment. And I want you to think about that for a second, because when it comes to commitment, you have to be all in. You can't just go in halfway. But what is it exactly that you're committed to? Are you committed to the mission and just the mission? I would encourage what we do every day in our office, being affiliated with the sexual assault prevention. We need to be committed to each other across the department. It's so important that we're committed to each other and not just the mission, but the mission in and together. But also we need to talk about leadership. So you have that personal commitment. Am I all in? Is this what is expected of me? Do people trust me to do my job? Do I trust others to do their job? But when it comes to leadership, leadership's a little bit different flavor here. Sometimes, and I remember being, an E2 and E3 going, what is leadership doing? They are just taking us down the wrong path. I can't believe they're doing this. And this is where your leadership and your trust and your commitment to your leadership has to be unmovable. This character that you have, your leadership is depending upon you to carry through with your decision making. And they have to trust, and sometimes your leadership needs to, we call it fire and forget. They need to give you a task and they need to just forget about it because they know you're going to do it. I like to say, I always like to have my folks tell me, tell me that the chicken can pull the cart. And by that I mean, if you tell me the chicken can pull the cart, then I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to go and do something else because I trust you and what you're telling me. And so, again, leadership is questioned all the time, but we need to make sure that we're looking at each other's character as well as leadership's character as we move forward. All right, so we kind of wrap this in, and we'll be taking some questions here momentarily, but I just want to kind of wrap this up and why character matters. I will tell you that it comes back to trust, but one of the reasons that character matters is because it determines what a person can do. If you have high character and I know that you can do the job, then I'm going to trust that when I give you a task, that you can make the decision and that you're going to make the right decision. Decision making is critical to the military as we develop leaders. And so sometimes we give individuals opportunities to lead, to make decisions at a very, very junior rank. I know in the Air Force, right, we tend to have 18 and 19-year-olds turning wrenches on hundreds of million-dollar weapon systems. And so it's critical that you have high character, high moral character, because I have to trust that you're making that right decision at the lowest deck plate level, flight line level, or field level. So we have a point where, yes, good people do bad things. We've seen it. Colonel Taradash talked about senior leader making poor decisions, and it's frustrating. I understand that, and one thing that you'll always have with me is I never mince words. There's a lot of frustration out there, but this is where we need each and every one of us to step up and meet our responsibility to raising our hand. We all took an oath, and it doesn't matter if you're officer, enlisted, or civilian. You all took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That is extremely important in what we do every single day. I have an opportunity to speak frequently across the department, and I will tell you that with that, I've been able to recognize and see a lot of quotes, but this quote that's on the bottom of the screen right now, I think what amazes me is, you could have one quote but have 50 different people that say that quote. And so the funny thing about this quote is that Ralph Waldo Emerson, Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, supermarket magnate Frank Outlaw, and spiritual teacher Gautama Buddha, and the father of Margaret Thatcher are all responsible for this quote, and which spans quite a time. But watch your thoughts, for they become words. Watch your words, for they become actions. Watch your actions, for they become habits. Watch your habits, for they become character. watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. And so you see how thoughts kind of transition into your destiny, but nothing speaks more volume than your character as you move out and lead our force. So with that, I kind of want to open it up. I know that there's a lot of questions that I wasn't able to read. So again, thank you so much for the comments. I greatly appreciate them, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Chief. We appreciate you taking the time today and going through this with us. There was some great comments being made, not necessarily any questions, but basically some things came up as you were talking about trust and walking the walk and actually emulating. And that's what some of these comments were saying, is that, you know, we've got at basic training, you're being told how to behave, how to act, how to interact, but it's only through the emulation and the visualization that they actually see, oh, that's how that person's acting and here's the outcome. I think sometimes as we're telling people all the how to behave and how to act within a certain way when you're in basic training, I don't think they fully understand the why. And I think that if we take the time to explain that how a positive outcome can come out of this behavior versus the negative, I think that helps highlight. And if they understand the why, I think then they're more committed to maybe doing some of the changes that are required within themselves, and then before you know it, the entire community or the workforce is also doing that. So thank you. We also had a couple of comments that came up that were about newcomers coming to the organization. So what are some things that you may recommend or suggest how to set the certain tone of a climate for a newcomer, because all they want to do is fit in. And if they came from a negative environment, they're going to want to lean towards an environment that they're familiar with, even though it's not the best environment for them. So what are some things you may recommend?
So, you know, this is no different, and I will tell you that this is a question that is asked across each of the services, and so there's some. I just kind of saw some notes about modeling character, but courageous character. You know, it's that courageous professionalism, saying something that is kind of bucking the trend. You know, we talk about the difference, or you need to understand sometimes the difference between the culture and the climate. And it is difficult coming into a unit that is maybe has a past of, you know, I don't mix any words. So when I was in Korea, I worked for a unit there, and so they were big on tacking on stripes, right? And so you would walk the gauntlet, and your arms would be black and blue. And I think we know that, hey, that's part of just, you know, that's part of tradition, or that's part of just, you know, becoming one of us. You know, we talk about hazing and bullying. But that courageous leadership of being able to step up and say, you know what, that's not right. That's inappropriate. It is difficult. It's going to be one of the most difficult things that you do in your military career, is saying, you know what, I don't think that's right. But I will tell you, here's what puts me at ease sometimes when I am out speaking, or I'm online and I'm at a blog, or I'm in social media. I see a lot of our junior members. I see a lot more junior members today, enlisted and officer, that are doing the right thing and saying the right thing that I didn't have enough courage to do when I was younger. And so I give a lot of praise to our younger generation now, because they have the professional courage to step in, and when it doesn't look right, they say that's not right. And so I would just say, you know, continue to foster that. Reach out, look for a mentor. You know, sometimes it's easy to find somebody that works in the unit, or maybe is on a base, or on a ship, that you look and you say, hey, that person does it right. Maybe they have high character, moral character, and it's somebody that you can say, hey, here's what's going on in my section. It doesn't seem right, and ask them to get some advice. You know, I don't think there's one answer that I can give that's going to fit all areas, but you know, continue to step in and do the right thing. You'll stand out in the right way.
Okay, Chief. Thank you. We did have one question. I just want to hear your thoughts, and maybe we'll get back to Colonel Taradash to see what your thoughts are. The comment is from Lamira McGee that in processing should include a desk side with the Sharp VA or with an EOL or someone that deals, maybe just any of the offices that deal with any of the readiness impacting behaviors. Do you think that's the right level that we should introduce the here's what you don't do, or would you rather just have a conversation just to say here's some things that you can do to avoid these pitfalls?
Yeah, so you know, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I would have to. I think, you know, if we put that onus, you know, depending upon what sharp office you're visiting, there's some big bases out there that might be a heavy lift for a sharp office. However, I think when you talk about destructive behaviors, you know, our new director kind of has the 3+1, where she talks about sexual assault, domestic violence, and suicide awareness, and the +1 being alcohol. You know, I think it's a shared responsibility in kind of doing that. Hey, this looks right, but I would never be opposed to saying, hey, stopping in at the Sharp office or the base SAPR office to kind of get a, hey, here's what the lay of the land is. Here's kind of what what we're seeing for issues. Colonel Taradash?
So I agree that resource should be there as a part of the in-processing, but I'll take a little different approach. I think it should be the leader's responsibility. It's the commander's responsibility to in-process and to set the conditions for their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines as they in-process into their units. And so so we don't want to cross that line of outsourcing what's your responsibility to somebody else who's not in the chain of command. So that's kind of how I would add to that. I would also, we've talked a lot about modeling character, modeling behaviors that you want your unit to have. I would say that we as leaders have a tool at our disposal, and that is we can prime and frame the behavior that we want our unit to emulate. There are ways, and I'll add to the resources not only the what I read off of, which is a paper that we wrote titled the Profession and the Professional, but I'll also add the priming and framing paper that our office wrote. That we can prime, we can. Dan Arelli, the author I mentioned, he wrote a book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, and in it they did a study that cheating in colleges is at an all-time high, but by having the students affirm an oath before they took the test drove down the cheating in the classroom in that testing atmosphere, drove it down to almost zero. Now, you know, you'll never eliminate any of our negative behaviors, cheating, sexual assault, sexual assault. You'll never eliminate them. But the closer we can drive it to zero is really our goal. And so that priming of making a person take an oath before they took that test, we can do the same thing as leaders. We can prime people for good behavior, and we'll send that out as well. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Colonel, for readdressing that and sharing your thoughts. And if you guys have any questions, I've been trying to scroll down here and see if we won. See, Darcy said we had a feedback group that was made up of all ranks, which was good. One of the issues was the lack of, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the rest. Was the lack of, maybe Darcy, maybe you could type it in the chat box so we could get the full, what the full comment was. But in the meantime, we did have one question that came up for you, Colonel Taradash. As what do you see, and I'll have you readdress the question as well, Chief, is what do you see as our biggest shortfall?
So our biggest shortfall is really of our own doing, and that is we turn over people so quickly. Every year, I mean, we're turning over 30,000 soldiers. The Marine Corps, much smaller than we are, they're turning over about the same number, and it's by design. I got it. But that's our greatest challenge, is we are socializing young civilians into being soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. We socialize them in a training environment, and then we put them loose. We turn them loose on an organization, a unit, and then we expect them to maintain that level of discipline and values that they've learned in that socialization process or indoctrination process, whatever you want to call it. Our greatest challenge is dealing with all that turbulence and maintaining some kind of consistent level of standards and all of this. And I don't mean to get philosophical on everybody, but all of this has an impact on our readiness as a military. And that's why in the construct of OSD that it's no just happenstance that all of the the SAPR, the sexual or the suicide prevention, the risk reduction office, the family advocacy all of those, the Office of Diversity and Management, they all fall under the Assistant Secretary of Defense for readiness, because every single one of those negative behaviors erodes the readiness of our military, and our turnover is another contributing factor to that erosion. And so that's I think our greatest shortfall or challenge. How do you mitigate it? Wow. We mitigate it. Right now we're not going to change the policy of that turnover. However, the more focus we can put on as leaders, the better modeling we can do, the better we can make the little. I used to be told, Lieutenant, shut up, just focus on your part of the Army. The better if we can all just focus on that small part of the organization we control and make it the very best. I think we'd be doing all of ourselves a great service and attacking some of that shortfall.
Okay, great. Thank you, Colonel. And I see Darcy did make a comment about personal leadership training at the sergeant, basically the NCO level. They focused the last 10 years has been on tactics. And are the schools stepping up? Do we think that our PME is now changing the focus, not so much tactics, but more to people, in order to try to get at some of the behaviors that were causing some of our problems? And then we also had a couple of comments talking about, Kathy says, as a victim advocate, it feels awfully lonely when leadership isn't on the same page. And in quotes, there's old school, meaning there's some of that older mentality. And I think there's a little bit of confusion sometimes about what's tradition versus what's just not working anymore for the type of soldiers that are coming in. That are joining the military today are not the same as they were 20 years ago. So thank you, everybody, for your comments as we push through. And I know if you guys have any other questions, I'm going to leave the room open so that you can post them in the chat box, and we'll scrub through our chat there so we can find any of the comments and questions that were useful. So let me just, for sake of time and respect of everybody else's time, I just want to get through one of our discussion questions that we had listed here. So we heard from Colonel Taradash, and we also heard from Chief Master Sergeant Tuman, and we just wanted to hear some thoughts from you all. How might you be able to use some of this information that was presented today, and what specifically, if anything, might be helpful that you need from us in order to help yourselves better understand the topic that we presented today. So we'll just give you some time to type those in over on the chat box. A read list, absolutely. We talked about this morning, and we said, hey, every commander has a read list on the base. And I know when I was trying to make the next rank, I had to put get my supervisor to sign off that I read all the leadership and ethics books. But from our standpoint, as we're trying to develop you as stakeholders, because you're going to be responsible for the execution of our programs out in the field. And so we talked about it this morning, saying it might be helpful to provide a read list or a most recent thing that helps build our skill building and our knowledge around the area of addressing readiness impacting behaviors. Because I think I may know a little bit about sexual assault prevention. I don't know a lot about suicide prevention. I don't know a lot about how to build trust with my coworkers. I may not know how to communicate correctly. And I think these are just small little skills. So we talked about sharing a read list. We may post something to SAPR Connect and be able to provide something to our SAPR community that would be helpful. Not everything is always a research. Sometimes it's an opinion or a viewpoint from somebody that might be helpful to better understand the topic. So most definitely we will do that. I see comments there, everybody. It's useful, yes. I hope that the information that we passed on today was helpful for you to understand how professionalism and profession, being a professional, is defined in order for you to be able to use your characteristics and the behaviors and some of the skills that you have in your everyday living. So some comments here. This training was very beneficial. Thank you, Jennifer. We also said there's a question of making sure the information like this is given out at leadership courses. Oh, absolutely. I think that every service PME, professional military education and development, covers segments. I think that it's almost to the point of, okay, I get it. I've heard the ethical leadership lecture several times, but that's part of that initial messaging, right? And then as you're going through the service, as you're growing up in the service and you're making rank, it's iterative. So what you needed to know as a lieutenant, that's the level of information you needed to know as a leader at that level. But then as you got promoted as our sailors and airmen and Marines, and as they get promoted, what they need to know is, now what do I need to know? Because I'm handling a bigger group of people, a more diverse group of people, and an aging group of people. So I think that that's really important. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody for all the comments and the participation, and we're so thankful that we were able to have, I think at the level, I think we had 200 people log in, and we appreciate you all taking the time and spending this afternoon with us just to go through all of this. So I'm just going to do a quick wrap up here. We heard from Colonel Taradash, and we heard from Chief Master Sergeant Tuman on their views as senior leaders on the professionalism and why character matters so much. We covered some of the information on how being a professional can influence and reduce the negative impacting behaviors and create a culture that's necessary to do our mission without any threat of sexual assault or any other crime and behavior. So as always, we always want to remind folks that if you're looking for information on primary prevention, we have our SAPR Connect community of practice. And if you have any questions about that, or you need to get someone signed on, they can reach out directly to me. But you can basically click on the link to our group page and walk through and have your CAC registered, and we'll grant access so that you can get some of the information. It is across all services. Any rank, any background or MOS or specialty that you're in, we encourage people to get on there and look at the information and share anything you've got that could contribute or others could benefit from. And lastly, for those of you that need credit, we will issue a certificate after the completion of a survey. So here is the link. I recommend that you copy and paste it or save it. It's just a real short survey that we ask you to take. I'm going to leave the survey open until about mid-May, so it gives you guys time to get to the link and get to the survey. And if you happen to not remember the link after today, don't worry. It'll be posted up and shared out when I send out the information for the webinar. So if you don't need credit, we'll still give you a certificate for participating today, because we're very thankful that you all took the time to sit down and listen to our speakers today. And we hope that you'll join us again. We'll be doing this in June sometime, so stay tuned to SAPR Connect, and we'll definitely let you know when the next session will be. And we're always open. In the survey, there'll be a question that we'll ask, is there a specific topic you'd like for us to address in webinars? And we're happy to do service-only sessions. We're happy to do one-on-one sessions with a specific service and with specific group folks that you want to gather in the room. We're happy to do that as well. So just reach out to us and let us know. And thank you, everybody, for all the great comments and the participation. I'm sure our speakers were very thankful that you guys were alert and listening and interactive. All right, folks. So I'm just going to leave the the link up for a little while if you guys need to copy and paste that. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.